Welcome to Tangents from Coin Center. I'm Jerry Brito, and with me today I have one of my favorite people in Washington, D.C., Alex Sternhell, who is one of Coin Center's registered lobbyists, and he is on our advisory board. And he's been with us from before the beginning, and he is incredibly, key to what we do at Coin Center. So I thought, Alex, I'd have you on today to maybe just talk a little bit about DC and lobbying and Congress and the agencies and, all that. So I guess maybe you can start off by telling us a little bit about your background, how you got into this business and all that.
Sure. Well, Jerry, thanks for having me on. I have to tell you, I got really excited by the introduction that I was one of your favorite people until you caveated in Washington, D.C., which is kind of par for the course. But thanks much for having me on. I think my story is, a little bit typical for a lot of people that, particularly young people that get involved in public policy and get involved in Washington, D.C. I came up directly out of undergrad. I'm originally from New Orleans, and came up to Washington with a job that I was able to secure, an entry-level job that I was able to secure through introductions from local representatives at home. And I came up to Washington to work for then Senator John Breaux out of Louisiana, who was my home state senator. I won't go into the gory detail, but at the end of the day, there was no job. And I found myself in Washington, D.C., looking for a job, not knowing a tremendous amount of people, but having sort of an interest inside of working in Washington, working in the center of all that is public policy and politics. I was kind of fated to do this, which is that my father is a former academic and a PhD in political science. I spent my summers working in the state capitol in Louisiana, in Baton Rouge. And so I kind of knew I wanted to do this for a long time, came up for this opportunity that disappeared, and ended up starting with internships and working my way as hard and as fast as I could on the House side for a congressman out of the great state of Florida. And worked hard, first one in, last one out, was able to demonstrate that I could perform the functions of what was then a legislative assistant, and became a legislative assistant for a congressman on what was then the House Banking Committee.
And legislative assistant is like the lowest rung. It's like above intern, right?
There are a couple of other rungs before there.
Oh, yeah?
But, it's...
legislative correspondent, I guess, would be below
legislative correspondent, and then you have staff assistant, which is also kind of an amorphous term. Somebody that answers the phone, runs the intern program, helps with sort of the front line of dealing with constituents. So, House offices are pretty small. They tend to be around between 18 to 25 staffers. Half of those are located in the district, right. So you generally have like 7 to 10 people jammed into an office inside one of the 3 House office buildings. I will never forget that, my first job as a legislative assistant, there were 4 of us packed in a room, and if we leaned back, all 4 of our chairs would touch. That kind of condensed environment. Anyway, so that was my original start, which was basically grinding my way from an internship into a legislative assistant, working for a House member out of Florida.
And then you found your way to the Senate, because you're a Senate guy. That's how I think about Alex Sternhell. Yeah. Alex Sternhell's a Senate guy. He's not a House guy. And maybe you can tell us how you got to the Senate, and maybe you can give us a little flavor of the difference between maybe not the Senate and the House. I think people might get that, but Senate people and House people, and why there is such a thing.
Sure. It's interesting. I spend a fair bit of time talking to people that have just come to Washington and who are trying to find their way through this system. And they often ask me, should I work in the House? Should I work in the Senate? Where should I be focusing on? And, I did it. I think, I think it's illustrative of the differences in the two places. As an LA, starting off as a 21-year-old, I was able to work through 3 congressional offices, working for members on the same committee, which was where my expertise began to develop.
And that was House Finance, I imagine.
Yes, House Financial Services. Well, it was then House Banking. They didn't change the name, right. So Financial Services Committee in the House. But because of the fact that House offices are so small, I had a direct and independent relationship with the members of Congress that I work for. And when you're at the lowest levels, if you're seeing, the member whose name is on the door and developing a relationship, and in many cases developing a mentor, it's a fantastic way to start your career there. It was great for me. And there are lots of other places in the House that are fantastic, but there's probably no better place to start than working for a House member and understanding the needs of constituents and understanding why they're there, what drives them, and what they care about, and trying to implement that through Capitol Hill. So I worked for 3 members there. Again, I spent the majority of my time standing along the House Banking Committee wall because the committee rooms were so small that staff didn't have seats. So we stood there guiding our members through a variety of hearings and markups that were there. That was half my job, and the other half was working for, the constituents of the district, that whether it was Florida, Utah, or Connecticut, which is where my last job on Capitol Hill was. I became the legislative director for a member of Congress out of Connecticut. I did this all pretty quickly. I was 24, almost 25 years old when I became an LD, and did a couple of years there, a year and a half there, and then moved over to the Senate, which is a very different beast. So not only was I moving from House offices for members who were generally in tough re-elections every 2 years, so dealing with the pressures associated with re-election was something we constantly did. But I then moved to the Senate, and I worked for a very senior member. And not only did I work for a very senior member who really didn't have re-election, was in a very safe seat, but I also moved to a congressional committee, the Senate Banking Committee, where I was able to focus much more on policy and much less on sort of the personal office concerns that you deal with. So I was there for about a decade, which it's hard to describe how much I learned and how much fun I had at the same time. There's simply nothing like working on Capitol Hill and actually creating laws, working for members who are active, and it's a fantastic feeling.
And so that was Chris Dodd.
That was Chris Dodd, yes, Senator Chris Dodd from Connecticut.
Right, and so listeners who have been paying attention will figure out that you're a Democrat.
Yes, without prefix, suffix, or apology.
Correct. And so, so that's one thing I want. So I want to get back to. So I want to get to the question of Democratic versus Republican lobbyists and how they work together and all that. But take a step back and sort of press you again. Talk about the distinction between the Senate and the House. I mean, one way I like to just tell people who know nothing about politics, something I was telling Peter Van Valkenburg a little while ago. Was that the way to think about it is the fewer number of the position there are, the more important it is. So there's one president, right? There's 50 governors, there's 100 senators, there's 435 members of Congress, et cetera. And so is that's part of the distinction between the Senate and House, but also, as you were kind of alluding to, it also has to do with the terms. You got 6-year terms versus 2-year terms.
No, absolutely. From a pure staff perspective, because of sort of the proximity and the relationship and the closeness of House offices, and the fact that basically your reelection campaign starts the day you get elected, right. There is a particularly, I tended to work for fairly moderate Democrats on a political scale that were generally in districts that were highly contested, which meant that an enormous amount of time had to go to and should go to constituent service, making sure that these members of Congress were out in their districts and were coming back to Washington and dealing with the issues that were most important to back home. But at the same time, they were also having to raise literally millions of dollars in both small and large donations. And that is a ever-present and can be almost all-consuming for members that work. This is generally what a House office has to deal with. On the Senate side, election, those are in the House, it's every 2 years. In the Senate, as you described, it's every 6 years. There is much more time to focus on broader public policy issues and legislating in a way that without having some of the burdens associated with fundraising, for example, or the constant going back and forth into your district. Many senators, the majority of senators, are back home a ton, but they do have a greater ability to think big picture rather than the day-to-day that many House members get dragged into as a result of the nature of their job.
Right.
Let me tell you one vignette. Yeah. I'll just,
please.
At between 21 to 25, I worked for 3 House members. I called all of them by their first names. And I will never forget, I'd worked for my former boss in the Senate, Senator Dodd, and who I am, tremendously grateful for, and one of the people that really shaped, my professional and personal skill set. And we were sitting in an office, and I never referred to him as Chris. He was always referred to as Senator. That was who I called him, or boss, which was probably the more colloquial. And a guy came in for a meeting, and he sat down, and he'd worked for Senator Dodd, when he was a House member. And every 30 seconds, the guy kept calling him Chris. Hey, Chris this, and Chris that, and Chris this. So the guy walks out, and I look, and I said, boss, when do I get to call you Chris? And he looks at me and goes, whenever you work for me when I'm in the House. And, it's kind of a joke, and it's funny, and, it's just an interesting vignette. But because there are only 100, because a Senate staff is, has probably twice to 3 times as many staffers proportionally that are working for them, it's kind of a different relationship until you work your way up into the senior levels of the office.
Right. And I can imagine, and I guess I don't know this, but Senate staffers don't tend to be the 21-year-olds. It's like you don't see 21-year-old Senate staffers.
You do. You do have 21-year-old staffers. And by the way, some of them are the most hard-working guys up there. But generally, if you're dealing with more professional staff, or legislative assistants tend to be
more experienced, or have JDs,
more experienced, have advanced degrees, have more seasoning. Now, I got to give you the caveat: there are tons of people in the House on congressional committees and working for members that are very seasoned as well, but there tend to be a lot more of them in the Senate.
Right.
You're never going to let me be able to talk to anybody in the House. I keep denigrating all of my House background. Keep going. That's all right.
Okay, so maybe I should just ask you. So, what does a lobbyist do? I think people have this weird idea of what lobbying and lobbyists do. But what is a lobbyist? And so, okay, so then let's get to the punchline. So you work for Chris Dodd for a decade, and then you leave working for the government, and you set up your own shingle. If I'm not mistaken, you went straight to that, right? You set up your own shingle, and you take on clients lobbying Congress, given that you know everybody in Congress, especially on the Senate side. So, so what is a lobbyist? What do you do?
So, it's, first of all, there's not just one type of lobbyist. There are multiple different varieties, as you can imagine. and by the way, they're, some of them have, much of what the type of lobbyist they are depends upon the type of experience that they had working on Capitol Hill. And so, there are subject matter expert lobbyists that tend to focus in particular areas. I, for example, work a lot on financial services issues and technology issues, and fintech being the bridge between the two. Why is that? Well, primarily because I spent a decade working on the Senate Banking Committee and 5 years working for 3 members of the House Financial Services Committee. And that combination of experience sets me up for not only having a substantive knowledge of basically every major financial services bill that's passed for the past 25 years, but also a set of relationships on Capitol Hill that I can advocate positions for clients. So to give you sort of a brief rundown, there are a couple of different types of lobbyists. There are lobbyists that work for companies directly, in-house lobbyists. There are lobbyists that work for trade associations, so companies forming together to form a group.
So, for example, Robin Wiseman, who hosts some episodes of the show, is Coin Center's in-house lobbyist. She's full-time at Coin Center. It's her full-time job. We're only, she's full-time with us. You are multi-client.
Yes.
We are one of your clients. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So Robin, who is sort of best in class, works individually for a company. Some work for trade associations, some work for law firms, and then others do what I do, which is multi-client work, which is my firm represents a variety of different clients in a variety of different spaces, and so I'm advocating on behalf of companies and nonprofits to do a couple of things. Number one, giving clients an understanding of what's going on is sort of a foundation of everything. A baseline of understanding sort of the motivations of members of Congress and staff, where directionally things are headed, and then a regular ability to know when that direction is either changing or not is critical. That is, I think sort of a baseline need for all lobbyists. Number two, the ability to impact and affect change. And that's important. It comes from, a number of things, but it comes from, educating and advocating members and staff on, positions that they care about, and more importantly, positions they don't care about. You've got to be able to convince people that something they don't know about or are opposed to is important and they should take a relook at it. And making the ask is probably the most difficult thing for members of the lobbying community to do. They've got to go in and basically change people's minds. And that's a lot of work. And you have to have a baseline, generally, a baseline relationship with folks to know that you're an honest broker and you're going to keep your word. And secondarily, you generally have to have substantive expertise to be able to articulate the problem or the position that's important to the client.
So I think lobbyists have, in the popular imagination, a reputation of being sort of hired guns. Don't really believe what they're advocating, and maybe getting the people that they're lobbying to do things that they don't believe either, for contributions or et cetera, et cetera. So how do you square all that? How do you explain all that? Is that true?
It's interesting. The truth of the matter is that I've spent a long time inside the public policy arena on the other side of the coin. I spent 15 years working on the vast majority of the issues we're talking about, and understanding what consumer protection and investor protection and writing bills designed to do those things. And so I have been fortunate enough that clients have chosen me, and I've been able to choose clients that I think represent the best inside their industry sector. And I generally advocate for things that I believe in on a regular basis. And I believed when I worked on the Hill as well. It doesn't always square, but I'm never asked to do anything by clients that I think is inappropriate or, would be negative for the members of Congress that we're advocating to. I think crypto is an excellent example. I was working on crypto in the 90s.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm like, it could be the crypto wars of the mid 90s. Yeah.
Yes. No. I was working on more traditional issues, but for example, I got to sit in. I was staff director of the Securities and Investment Subcommittee, and I got to see firsthand the advent of technology into the world of investing. Mm. And, it was this fixed way of doing things where literally you picked up a phone and you called a broker, and the broker called an interim broker who called a third broker who sent a guy down to the floor of the stock exchange and then argued with a guy about bids and asks. All of that disintermediation was just, part of the daily existence. And then you plug technology into all of that, and it makes it incredibly more efficient. It also does a lot of very difficult things to all of the people inside that food chain. And so as a public policy maker, as a staffer, I was the one that had to be part of adjudicating what was really best for investors. Was there value associated with all of those middlemen and what they were providing to the process? And there was value, but was it outweighed by technology and the innovation associated with it? And as we've seen today, if you've seen, the markets they've never been closer to investors. Mm-hmm. You can buy and sell stocks from your phone today. And so that kind of experience, that kind of understanding and living through, which was a 7, 8, 9, 10-year process for me, makes me passionate about technology issues, makes me passionate about what for me was the start of crypto when you and others were involved in creating Coin Center.
What I think is interesting is, so lawyers represent clients all the time. And if you're a defense attorney, for example, you defend your client, regardless of what in the back of your mind you might think might be the truth. And we don't hold that. In fact, we kind of celebrate that. We have that. So just because you're an advocate for somebody, I don't think necessarily means that you're doing anything wrong or for anything just because you don't believe 100% of the position. That's one thing I'll say. But then probably more importantly, in my experience and what I've learned is if you lie or if you give bad advice, you're quickly going to just burn all of your reputation and bridges, and nobody's going to listen to you and nobody's going to hire you. So really you'd be doing a client a disservice if you were, one would be doing a client a disservice if one, wasn't doing the kind of advocacy that would benefit the member and you really believed is what's best. Yeah,
you're totally right. And again, I saw it working on Capitol Hill. There were times when lobbyists would come to me with something that, not only was not good public policy, but was disadvantageous or was negative to my boss taking a position. And as a staffer, you're highly defensive of your boss, and you're highly defensive of creating good public policy. And so you very quickly stop taking phone calls from lobbyists who were selling you snake oil. So the truth of the matter is that the vast majority of lobbyists are not in that business, because if they are in that business, they're not around for very long.
Right. And why do we need lobbyists? I guess I'll just ask that question. Why do we need lobbyists?
Wow, you're asking me to justify my own existence. That's pretty deep.
It should be a pretty easy question then.
Because you haven't decentralized the business of advocacy yet. Okay, this is kind of your fault.
You have decentralized government. Because once you do that, then you don't need lobbyists. Yes.
I'm going to take a step back from that. There is an overwhelming amount of responsibility that both members of Congress on the Hill and regulators have. And the flow of information and the different sets of issues is simply unmanageable for members of Congress and the 20 or 30 staff to deal with. They have to be able to deal with individuals who have significant expertise inside a set of issues that they're working on. And you need to be able to communicate those issues in a way that is articulated at the right base level of knowledge. I mean, one of the things that I really enjoy is when I start with a staffer on an issue that I've spent a lot of time with, and or a member of Congress that I'm talking to, and they really don't know anything about what I'm talking about. Like crypto, for example. Mm-hmm. And you walk in and you start trying to tell them the difference between centralized and decentralized, and it's almost like they're finding it for the first time. And and then 6 months later, you're going back into them, and they've had not only the benefit of your expertise, or for example, my expertise, but more importantly, me bringing someone like you or Peter or Robin in and giving them that expertise, and imparting that to them in a way that really sort of fundamentally changes their understanding of an issue. So that, and that's just one set of lobbyists. Then you have a wide variety of folks in different areas that are also providing information. And it gives policymakers, a better, an understanding of the horizon of an issue. Because at the end of the day, their job is to make decisions about laws and what's good public policy and what's not. And in order to do that, you have to be able to talk to the people that are experts in the field. Right. And I'm a conduit for those experts.
And after 6 months of talking to them, educating them, they understand, they begin to see the benefits, they become passionate about it even, and they say, what can I do to help? And then they're introducing a law that would be beneficial, let's say, because it clarifies taxes for crypto or something. On the flip side, you've got members like Brad Sherman who are not educated, don't understand. I know this is tough for you, Alex. I'm sorry. I'm speaking. You don't even have to look at me while I say this.
No, my name is Peter Van Valkenburg for the next 45 seconds, but go ahead. Yeah.
And you need somebody to attempt to go in there and say, hey, I see you have some concerns. Let's talk about it. And maybe you can turn them around. Maybe you can't. Maybe you can dispel some misunderstandings. Maybe you can't. And I think it's an important function that we play, and that I think, as you say, these are small staffs with incredible responsibilities, and left, with nobody to talk to and learn from, they'd be in bad shape. That said, I think what some people would point out is, well, maybe the problem is that they have that much responsibility, right? Maybe if the government wasn't doing as much as it does, it would be more manageable. It wouldn't be unmanageable. But anyhow,
we can. Do you want to have the conversation about size and scope of the government right now? I'm sure that's one that you.
Not right now. We're gonna get to it. Let me ask you one more question, sort of about lobbying before move on. So you've got a Republican partner, and in lobbying shops, especially as you say, multi-client lobbying firms, you'll always have usually two partners, one Republican, one a Democrat. What's up with that? How does that work?
It's interesting. it's there are a couple different business models that happen. Um, you know, there are sole proprietors that are one-man shops. That generally there are very few of them. It's hard to cover the landscape in a way that's effective with a House, Senate, and regulators, whatever field, whatever vertical you're in. You know, the truth of the matter is that I probably have, you know, my partner who's fantastic. And there are a couple people in my shop, but Mike Ahern is my primary Republican counterpart. The bipartisan nature of my firm is probably a reflection of the fact that when I worked on Capitol Hill, you know, when I started coming up with an idea for a piece of legislation, the first thing that I would go in and ask my boss about, you know, I'd pitch him the idea, and the first thing he would ask would be, okay, who are we doing it with? And that was find a Republican on the other side, because in the Senate, you've got to get 60 votes for at least now at this point, you have to get 60 votes. So working on a bipartisan basis to coming to consensus to get a bill passed was an absolute must for the most part. And I find that, you know, when dealing with both clients and with Capitol Hill, the ability to have not only the ability to both reach into the Democratic side and the Republican side is important, but it's just as important to have someone or people to internally make your case and have the holes punched in it before you go up to Capitol Hill rather than when you go up to Capitol Hill. Yeah. It's important to have that balance, that understanding of different perspectives inside of any issue.
Right. And I mean, just from a crypto perspective, you know, Republicans and Democrats are going to have different reasons why they're skeptical about crypto that you have to address, right? So each different reasons, and they each have different reasons why they should love crypto. And so it's important to know both mindsets and both caucuses and all that.
Absolutely.
So, okay, so let's talk about Congress. What's wrong with Congress? Why does nothing get done in Congress, Alex?
I mean, there the books that have been written about what's wrong with Congress, I think are many.
Yeah, what do you think? Come on, be real.
Look, there's a lot of different things. The truth of the matter is that for a variety of reasons that we don't have to go into details.
Why not? Let's go into detail.
I mean, we can have the conversation, but like there have been a number of factors that have contributed to the fact that there are very, very few seats that can both elect a Democrat and a Republican to Congress. So a significant majority of these seats are basically strongly held Republican or strongly held Democratic seats. And so those seats tend to, you know, represent whatever ideology or whatever party that got them elected in the first place. And it also generally pushes people towards following whatever the party agenda is for, for whatever issue set you're talking about. So, you know, where real compromise happens between Democrats or Republicans who are looking at an issue and are trying to find a middle ground. And the number of those members has simply shrunk over the years. Seats are safer, and there are few seats that are as accountable and as and that need to work with the other side of the aisle to get something done. And because of that, one major contributor, that's one of the reasons why.
So that's why it's very partisan, right? Congress is very partisan. And so there's maybe, I think there's something else, and tell me what you think about this. I think it's that, how long did Democrats hold Congress? 40
years.
40 years, right? So
up until 1994. 3.
Right. And
Well,
that's
was the year that passed.
right. And so it's changed now where Congress, in any given election year, control of Congress can flip. And so given the partisanship, there's very little incentive to cooperate because you might have all the power next time. So why give in an inch now? And on the flip side, same sort of logic.
So the savior has been here, Jerry, has always been the Senate.
Right.
Because it forced compromise. It forced people to come to the table and take 3/4 of a loaf.
Right.
And that's what's actually in jeopardy right now.
Yeah. So the Senate is counter-majoritarian, right?
Yes.
I mean, very much so, right? So every state gets 2 senators. You have the filibuster. So you really take 60 votes for something to be really considered.
Legislation,
yeah. So what's changing on the Senate side?
There's a bit of a, and it's easy to assign blame.
That's not assign blame.
I'm going to tell you why I'm not going to assign blame. Assigning blame, but there's a long history of both sides here. But the great thing about the Senate is not only is there constitutional authorities, but there's a significant amount of precedent that makes the Senate work, that provides comity between the majority and minority members. And over the past 10 years or so, that comity has come under stress. The latest thing that's caused it is obviously the death of RBG in the Supreme Court.
That's like this week. I mean, it's been under stress for some time.
It has, but there has been, that is let me put on a Democratic perspective. Yeah. That is the latest symptom of what has been a, very talented, very smart majority in the Senate that has done not nearly as much compromising as Democrats would like to have seen over the past 4 to 6 years that they were hoping for. So, this is it's getting real now. And the reason why RBG is, why this new nomination to the Supreme Court is real is, if this president nominates, which he's likely to do in the next 24 hours, and he's confirmed by the Senate in the last days and weeks of this session, which, by the way, legally they totally have the right to do. There is nothing illegal about this. What this is to some, this is a violation of precedent, not a violation of rules or violation of law. If they do this,
yeah.
And the election in November not only puts in a Democratic president, not only is Joe Biden elected, but you then also have a switch of majority in the Senate. Mm-hmm. And again, it's very tight, and both of those are certainly up in the air. You're going to have a Democratic president, a Democratic House, and a Democratic Senate. And you're going to have, they're going to want to move a Democratic agenda. Mm-hmm. And the thing that stops a Democratic agenda or a Republican agenda is when you control all three, the House, White House, and Senate, is the Senate filibuster.
Right.
That is the last gasp of the minority. And given the unhappiness associated with this Supreme Court nomination, now more than ever, there is increasing tension
There's going to be pressure on the Democratic leadership in the Senate
to get rid of the filibuster.
Right.
Yes.
But don't you think that, this is where the 6-year terms come in, right? They should be able to resist that.
It does or it doesn't. But what we've started to see is we saw it with the Tea Party, and we're seeing it with progressives from Democrats right now. We're seeing, tremendous unhappiness and unwillingness to just abide by the decisions of sitting senators, and members are primarying, sitting members of Congress are getting primaried by members of their own party. And there's a lot of reasons that go in that. Fundraising is one of them. Technology and the 24-hour news cycle is another one. There are a number of contributing factors there, but nevertheless, now more than ever, members feel like they have to push their own agenda.
But Alex, okay, so yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you that that's the prospects for the Senate look bad, because if we get rid of the filibuster, then you just end up with another house. You end up with two houses, right? And we know how we feel about the House, right, Alex? So
I'd like to distance myself from your comments. I think the House is fantastic.
But look, I mean, even when Republicans had the House, the Senate, and the White House up until the last election, what did they do? They didn't do much. So why doesn't anything get done? Right? Like there's a lot to be done, right?
First of all, I apologize, but I would think from certain folks, many Republicans and libertarians, for example, would be enthusiastic about so little getting done by government.
No, not when the stuff you want to get done is like making some government smaller or reforming entitlements, et cetera, right?
Yeah, those, that's incredibly difficult to do by either.
Yeah.
Right. And so, look, we've described some of the problems. You have to have the ability of members to compromise. You have to provide and afford them the ability to compromise.
Okay.
And that's part of what the filibuster is designed to do, is to force compromise. And, what's going to happen right now is you're going to have, two critically important pillars of the Democratic agenda, protecting, healthcare and Obamacare, and secondarily, potentially protecting, women's right to choose, are going to be decided in the Supreme Court over the next 12 to 18 months. And they're going to be decided unfairly by a court that has been, this is from a Democratic perspective.
Great. You muted yourself, Alex. Okay, you're good now.
Sorry.
All right.
So, and that's why now more than ever, we're looking at a situation which, in order to, for example, pack the court, which is putting more justices on the Supreme Court, you would turn to, in order to do that, you have to get rid of the legislative filibuster. And that's why it's a hot topic right now that many people.
Yeah. Okay. Recently, your friend and mine, Ben Sass, senator from Nebraska, wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal where he suggested some potential reforms to the Senate. Because he, said it's dysfunctional on a bipartisan basis. So I'm going to run some of these by you. Get rid of cameras. Get rid of cameras in the Senate. He says,
I think we're past that.
Really? Well, no, but I mean, you're saying it's not going to be possible, but if it were, it's a good idea.
It's hard to argue against transparency.
Really?
It is. I get it.
I mean, you've been to the same hearings I have. Nobody is learning anything at those hearings, right? And he points out, for example, that there's one committee that actually people work on a bipartisan basis, and what committee is that?
The Intelligence Committee.
The Intelligence Committee,
Right. I get it. I think while there's merit behind the suggestion,
yeah.
I think it's incredibly difficult to do and to tell the American people that they should.
No. You would still have reporters there. You could still have audio.
Excuse me, Jerry. The ability of given the attack on the media I don't think that the filter of the media is something that many Americans have been told they can trust and believe at this point.
Okay. What about
it's fake news, Jerry? I don't know what to tell you. Like, it is what it is. Like,
okay. What about dormitories?
Dormitories? You mean force members to?
I don't think you could force them, but I think you could have dorms and common dining halls and things like that.
I will say that I think the intent of that suggestion, which is that you have to force members of Congress to spend time with each other and develop personal relationships and to get a better understanding of why they believe in what they believe in, and make them, interact with each other on a personal level as well as it. I 100% support. I'm not sure that dormitories is the right move, but I think the intent behind that is absolutely the right move.
All right. Abolish standing committees. And what you would say you should do instead is every Congress, every 2 years, Congress should debate and vote on what two committees they want to have that Congress. Like, what is the most pressing thing we should be doing? And have that.
I think that there are so many difficult repercussions as a result of what you're describing in both the House and the Senate, rebidding committees, seniority on committees, jurisdiction on committees.
Yeah, but that's all inside baseball stuff. That's not what the American people care about. American people want Congress to work for them.
Right. But all of those things are, thanks, Jerry. No, but those are complicating factors inside a public policy process that probably adds tremendous stress to it. It probably doesn't simplify it.
Okay. Repeal the 17th Amendment. You're like, which one is that one?
Yeah, give me the 17th Amendment. Come on.
17th Amendment is senators are elected directly by the people.
I think if you ask most Democrats.
Because you said a minute ago that's getting pretty partisan, and the problem is that you're getting primaried by people on your own side.
Right. Unfortunately, I think each party looks through something like that through the lens of how they can take back more power, rather than whether that's better for the American people. And so I'm in that same boat. My initial reaction to what does that mean for Democrats?
Yes. So what you're doing is immediately doing a calculus of, if we just figured out, like, you just have to go look at the state houses who has a majority in each and see what the delta would be with the current Senate.
Yes.
What if it was even Steven right now?
It's never even Steven. There's always some sort of political advantage. I mean, there have been so many things that have been done inside this space to try to make it, to tinker with outcomes that have had unanticipated impacts. I think I think it's difficult to do. In a perfect world, you have a collection of nonpartisan or less partisan folks, given the authority to make recommendations and push decisions in this. It just tends to be very difficult to do in a highly partisan environment that we're in now.
All right. Give us a good story. You're famous for your,
oh God. For good story about what?
About Congress. Something that exemplifies maybe the dysfunction, but at the same time, the magnificence.
Having worked in both the House and Senate, and having worked for, I've worked for Democrats, I've worked quite closely on both sides of the aisle. There are a few times when, for me, the members' personal relationships, their ability to connect with people on the other side of the aisle, basically make everything easier and better. And one of those moments for me was working we'd worked on the bill is irrelevant, but we'd spent a ton of time, 18 months working on a specific piece of legislation. We'd gotten it through both the House and the Senate. Different versions were coming, and we went to what's called a conference committee, and we sat in this room in the Capitol, this dark room in the Capitol, where the senior members of the committee and the staff are all packed in, and this is sort of the moment where the deal is cut, where you take a House bill and you take a Senate bill and you add them together and you give and take, and it's a very intense. And if you're a Senate staffer or a House staffer, this is what you're preparing for. You're getting your boss and you're getting yourself ready for this moment. And it doesn't always happen this way. It happens less and less nowadays, but it used to happen more, where it was members in a room with staff facing each other and saying, we'll do this if you do that. And I will never forget, walking into this small conference room. We were the last people walking into the room, and standing on the other side of the table was the then chairman of a committee, a guy by the name of Mike Oxley, who was from Ohio, a fantastic member, and just one of the best people you ever meet. Just a great guy. But he was on the other side of the aisle, and I was working in the Senate, so it was not only on the other side of the aisle, but the old joke is, I forget exactly how it is, but if you're talking about a Democrat, and that would never say that a Senate Democrat would never say that that a Senate Republican was his enemy. They would say his adversary. The enemy was always was the House. Right. It was never in between the Senate. I botched that, but so I walk into this room. I'm walking in with my boss, and I look over and I see Mike Oxley, who's, I think I mentioned, has passed. And he stood up and he pointed right at me, and he screamed at me as loud as he possibly could, "We're going to kick your ass." And I froze. I had that moment of just like, here we are. I've worked on this bill. We're going to get to yes. This is going to be the time to get it done. And the guy that holds the gavel on the other side, that holds the pen, is screaming at me that he's going to kick my ass. And I thought, we're done. And then he smiled at me, and I realized that he was referencing the national championship football game, Ohio State, where his alma mater, and I'm from New Orleans, against LSU that year. And it was funny because he and I were the only two people in the room that got it. He wasn't doing it for anybody else. He was doing it for me and for him. And it was just such a great moment. And I remember the relief and tension associated that, look, both of us are trying to get to yes, and we're trying to do the right thing. And so that was the moment where I really felt like personal relationships for me were able to make this thing work. And that's part of what's important inside of this.
All right. Well, Alex Sternhell, thank you so much for coming on Tangents.
Thanks for having me, Jerry. I really appreciate it.